Okay, welcome back everyone. It's now time for our second panel. This one we'll be discussing how we can create HR strategies to build flexibility, adaptability and agility in our workforces and in our organizations. An agile workforce enables organizations to respond rapidly and effectively to market changes. And our panelists will be discussing how techniques such as restructuring, staff relocation, and revised approaches to goal setting can help to achieve this objective in the post-COVID world. It's my pleasure to introduce our panel moderator, Joanne Pavia. Joanne is Regional Sales Director for Sirva, specialist in talent mobility and redeployment. She's responsible for advising and supporting Asia-Pacific based clients in all matters relating to mobility, including showcasing new developments that support flexibility and change. So over to you, Joanna.
Thank you so much. Welcome everybody. We have a great lineup of panelists today, so allow me to introduce them to you. We have three panelists today. We have Dr. Knocke, who's the head of talent mobility for APAC for Schaeffler. We have Bala Subramaniam, I hope that was said well, Director of Group Talent Management and Development for Singtel. And we have Natalie Wright, who is the Group HR Director of Schaeffler. I'll just give a little bit of a brief intro on each one that we have here. Dr. Knocke is fully responsible for the expat and travel management in APAC. He leads an accomplished regional team with mature management and mobility. He has a diverse international moves. He's a subject matter expert in key areas of regulation, compliance, and providing support to the global businesses. So welcome and thank you so much for being a panelist today. We also have Bala here. As I mentioned, Bala leads the talent management function of Singtel Group. His team is focused on leadership development, bench strength and succession planning, as well as building a pipeline of young talent. His team's also responsible for managing high potential talent for young, emerging and future leaders across the Singtel Group. So welcome. And certainly not least, Natalie Wright, who's going to bring, I think, a huge talking topic today from a F&B perspective. Natalie is a Group HR Director for Schaeffler, covering Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Taiwan, Shanghai and Dubai. That's quite a bit. Natalie has over 10 years experience in HR in both UK, Asia from a retail and F&B and e-commerce, and specialises in organisational design and change management. So please excuse me, but welcome Natalie as well. And I think we may have lost Jan somewhere along the line. But with all that said, we will kick it off. We've got some great topics today. We have quite a few to get through. We will try as much as possible to address all of your questions as well. Please feel free to drop them into the side box. Otherwise, we will kick it off. I think. Welcome back, Jan. We've got you again. No. I think one of the first questions that we really wanted, or one of the first topics, if you will, we want to talk about was reallocating people quickly to where their skills are needed. And I think currently with everything going on globally, the need to be agile and kind of move at quite a pace has become quite relevant in this economy. Natalie, if you don't mind, I'll kick it off with you from a food and beverage perspective. I dare say this has been a hot topic and probably a key factor with your industry right now.
Yeah, definitely. So the challenge we have in our venues is obviously we have 3 venues in one essentially, and one part of that venue, definitely in Singapore, is still closed, which is our nightclub. Now, because of the offering, and this is the same in all of our markets, the offering and the service style is very different between restaurant versus nightclub. So we had to pivot very, very quickly. We unfortunately did make cuts in terms of headcount, but with our remaining staff, it was about reallocating them into the parts of the business where we could use their skill set. But obviously behind that was a massive training program to make sure we were giving them the skills to succeed in those new roles. The positive from a business perspective is we're now left with a 40% leaner team. However, that team are completely versatile, so they can work in any area of our business. And the positive for our team members is they have a new skill set and a broader skill set, which means they're not siloed to that one area of the business they were working in before. It also helps us with global mobility down the line when borders open, because we can now move people quite freely across our markets. from a head office perspective, I have a whole team that focus on events. So, that team, again, we had to very, very quickly pivot, look at their skill sets and move those people into different areas of our business. One of the big things we did when we reduced headcount was we merged roles. So I think we've been very fortunate in having very large teams before, and moving forward, that's just not viable in the world, probably at the moment, and also post-COVID for a couple of years. So we streamlined, we looked at efficiencies from an org design perspective, and we merged those roles and really pulled on people's skill sets. And it's been very, very positive for both the business and the team members so far.
Yeah, I noticed that you mentioned obviously that one of the positives was to get a leaner team and really make sure that the versatility was across the board. Was that a large takeaway for future as well, to realize that, you have to have that flexibility and agility? Because I mean, this must have come as a huge shock for the food and beverage industry.
Absolutely. I mean, one of our venues actually closed at the beginning of COVID, and then we reopened September last year. So we took that time when that business was completely closed, that was our China business, to actually, when we redesigned the organization, we completely changed the structure. We moved away from the historic structure of being very siloed in terms of the venue, and we moved to a completely more versatile workforce within that team. We also really focusing on part-time workforce as well, definitely within Singapore and within our China market as well. And that's been something that's been very valuable to us.
Yeah, fabulous. And Bala, I know that it's probably completely different industry and different scope, but I dare say with Singtel, there would have been quite a sizable expansion. So where we're talking about the F&B, where moving people quickly, it may have also been something that you had to do, but potentially from a different perspective.
No, absolutely, Joanne. And to just get some context right, so imagine everybody doesn't have their phone for a day. That causes so much panic. Now imagine banks are not able to communicate, hospitals are not able to communicate. The backbone rests on Singtel, which is one of the largest communications and technology service provider. And a large portion of our workforce is frontline. They're on the field, making sure the network stays up, making sure connectivity stays up. And here's an interesting thing about Singapore. Did you know that every day, 350,000 people cross the border from Malaysia to Singapore to commute on a daily basis? And that's a large migrant workforce. Singapore is a tiny island, and there's a large migrant workforce that comes in every day. Singtel, being one of the largest employers in the country, also has a large workforce that commutes every day. So when the lockdown happened, this was like about a year and a half back, overnight, the organization had to rethink of the way we operate, because come what may, at all costs, the services must stay up. And that's where we had to pivot overnight to think about how we can relocate workers who are commuting on a daily basis across the border, across the causeway, and how can we house them in locations in Singapore. So that's on a very physical level. The team came together, organized leadership team came together, as well as a cross-functional team came together to get simple things like, how do we house hundreds of people? How do we then, on a technology side, how do we make sure that we're resilient, that technology can take place of certain changes that are required in the organization? So it really made us accelerate our thinking, accelerate softwareization of a lot of the services that we were offering. So we could then manage remote services. And all of these changes made us rethink about plans. I would say what causes acceleration? COVID caused technology acceleration faster than anything else. And that caused us to think about our work structure, our job descriptions, how we use technology, etc. So it was
and we all need technology more than ever. We've all needed technology through this. So thank you in advance to you and all your teams for keeping us going, because it's been absolutely imperative. I wanted to lead into, and it's kind of, we've started to discuss it already. And again, Natalie and Jan, please feel free to jump in as well to add any of the content. But the next, I guess, topic, Bala, was really about reshaping organizational structures to become more agile, leaner, and more effective. Leaner, again, I don't necessarily know if that was in line with your business, but how did Singtel kind of approach that from an organizational structure point? Because also from what you just mentioned, I appreciate you would have had to look at how do we house these people, but you would have lost a huge amount of headcount through that where you just weren't able to do that. So how did that org structure really have to change?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We had to think about things differently. So one was the use of technology. How could we move away from a hardware-centric approach to a software-centric, softwareization of a lot of our services? The second was, how do we multitask? Things that, like Natalie spoke about, how do we look at adjacencies of skills? What are those that are quick to bridge and what are those that will take time to build? So we had to look at those adjacencies and quickly reshuffle people. There's always a up and down in terms of demand when we have a high requirement in one place versus a low requirement in another. So we had to look at quickly moving people, quickly upskilling them at scale. And this was done on the fly. Like, although a lot of these plans had been made, what we had to do was very quickly on the fly. In terms of restructuring, I think I could think about an example from my earlier organization. And this was way back when I was working at Twitter in San Francisco. Twitter at that time was a very central organization structure. So all of the engineering, all of the product development was centered across two hubs, which was basically San Francisco and New York. At that time, there was no pandemic, but foresight here to Jack and his team when they thought about where global talent would be available. It started off in 2018 as a cost exercise. So me and the head of finance sat down and thought about where can we get cheaper manpower? That's what it's the finance and HR get together. You can trust them to do this, right? Where can we get people cheaper? So it started off as a cost exercise. We were exploring various opportunities across the globe. And very quickly, we realized that it's not just a pure cost play. There's an opportunity for us to look at multiple elements within the organization. So there are internal factors and external factors. We looked at structural components that could affect team size. We looked at structural components that could affect team engagement. And based on this, we were able to evolve a 2x2 matrix, which is to say these are things that are favorable internally to the organization. These are things that are favorable externally to the organization. So if you look at it as a 2x2, those that are favorable internally and externally, locations would be where we would double down and increase investment. Those locations that were unfavorable externally, unfavorable internally, we would kind of exit those markets. And the locations where we had an externally favorable environment, but internally we had attrition which was high or engagement scores which are low, that gave us an opportunity to relook at what we could do, because that's probably entirely within our control. And that gave us an opportunity to relook at our entire workforce from an organization structure point of view. So leaner for sure, yes, but more efficient and more effective was the mantra there. What that led to was creating hubs across the globe for self-contained centers of excellence. So we looked at India, we looked at Europe, London, we looked at areas in Poland, in Ireland. Across the globe, we created these centers which could then self-contained operate independently and be end-to-end responsible for a product line. And this was research that was happening way back in 2018 and 19. And that's what kind of bore fruit when the pandemic struck and Jack Dorsey made an announcement, you can work from anywhere in the world. It took them 2 years of planning and a lot of detailed design to enable.
Good time to be planning. I mean, did they have, maybe they had a crystal ball we didn't know about, but you know, that's well planned in advance. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, it's great for that business where you can diversify and you can kind of put people in different places. Jan, from your perspective, I know you've got quite a large hub here in Singapore, and I think it goes for you and potentially Natalie as well. It might be a little bit different where we can't place, I mean, definitely for Natalie, you might not be able to place people in different locations, you know, as quickly and as responsively. But what did Schaeffler do, I guess, through this when it came to looking at reorganizing, restructuring? What was a bit of feedback from your business?
I mean, Schaeffler is in the manufacturing industry, yeah. So it's a traditional industry. We are supplying the major automotive OEMs. So they are expecting us to supply our parts to them, yeah, on time, yeah, no matter what is happening, basically. This means for us, of course, we might not be able to restructure as quickly as other industries, but this means also on the other hand that when it comes to our global mobility strategy, we didn't change anything. Yeah, didn't end any assignments just due to the pandemic. Let's look at one of our plants in Southeast Asia is based in Vietnam. Yeah, this will be one of our global hubs in the organization to supply certain products worldwide. We are ramping up the production there. Yeah, so of course it's hard to be hit by a pandemic, and it's hard to bring people over to basically bridge knowledge gaps we are facing there. But nevertheless, we need to do it. Yeah, it takes longer. Yeah, there are uncertainties. We need to be more flexible. We are asking also for flexibility when talking to assignees. On the other hand, we as an organization need to be flexible as well. Yeah, so moving to a different country or to a strange country I've never been before is always stressful, usually, especially when you do it with a family. But if you then face such a time as we are living in right now, it's even more stressful. Yeah, so you need to basically have the support of the organization, but we as an organization, we also ask the assignee for flexibility. We cannot plan every single step at the moment as we did in the past. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think this is crucial, to be open and transparent when communicating those kind of transfers, because they still need to happen. Yeah, show must go on in our business.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be a question, I guess, you know, with borders closing, obviously some movement would have been paused. How did you combat that when someone had a project that they had to do in, let's say, in Vietnam? Is it something that you could do virtually? I mean, I don't know manufacturing, but I would assume it's, you know, needing to be there on site and kind of have that input from a you know, face-to-face perspective. How did you manage that?
I think it depends, yeah, on the role itself. Certainly a couple of roles, we had to start with virtual assignments, yeah. So I recall one assignee coming in from India to Vietnam. There was no chance to bring him over with his family. So he basically started his role in purchasing, and purchasing is luckily something you can do remotely. From India, yeah, before then, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after the start of the assignment, really then physically relocating to Vietnam. But for other roles, really being based on the shop floor, yeah, when it's about operating the machines, yeah, setting up a new product lines, you need to have the employees really in the plant, yeah. It doesn't make any sense to have virtual assignments, yeah, to give instructions via, I don't know, Teams or Skype meetings. Yeah. So basically what we did, again, yeah, sometimes we had to postpone some of them, yeah. That's what we had to do, but also, again, observing the situation very closely. And sometimes, especially last year, you might recall, we had some time zones for a couple of weeks or months where you could easily still travel, yeah, before the other waves hit the country.
Yes.
So we used them, yeah, for business trips, and business trips basically converting to assignments, yeah. So this is what we do.
That's where that quick thinking, the agility comes in. I mean, you've got to take those moments to really kind of seize that moment, don't you? I mean, not that we had anticipated in any way, shape or form that would be in such a lockdown, but leading off that as well, I guess, we don't know what's happening moving forward, but how does Schaeffler plan on managing, I guess, the workforce moving forward? You know, there is a real lack of clarity right now. We're all trying to manage from a day-to-day perspective. And this question, I really want to hear from each one of you, but Jan, how are you managing it from your end?
I mean, in the end, if you look into our strategy, which means our long-term plan with regards to global mobility, there won't be too many changes. Yeah, of course, we need to be concerned and we need to be mindful. But that's what we did before. Yeah, assignments are always very cost-intensive projects, so you need to be cautious about it. But on what we see, but this is maybe rather depending on the nature of our organization, we are rather now moving into a phase where we will drive more assignments within the region. Yeah? The region Asia Pacific is quite diverse. This region has been restructured a couple of years ago in Schaeffler. Yeah? So now we are at a maturity level where we need less support from other regions, let's say Europe, Americas, Greater China. So we will foster definitely more assignments within the region, yeah, which should also be easier to administer, to implement. Yeah, I mean, if you have different regions to be considered and to be covered, this is even more complex. So if you narrow it down to one region, this will probably reduce the complexity, make realizing assignments easier for us. But nevertheless, we are still aware it won't be possible just to continue with, let's say, virtual assignments or to reduce assignments to an absolute minimum. This will not happen, at least not in Schaeffler.
Natalie, just with your perspective again, just on that question, you know, I know we talked about the takeaways with just being, you know, quite agile with the learning aspect, but moving forward, I guess, what's your kind of future expectation of what you can take away from what you've been through? What are the learns and what are you thinking of putting back into the business to make sure you're prepared for the future?
Well, I think a big thing for us as well was a mindset change. So our business had historically, I mean, we opened 4 new locations in 12 months. And our strategy was essentially we sent out the heavy hitters to those markets. You know, I went from HR, I sent my group chef, and we would go and we would set the businesses up, and then we would come back. And then we would visit that market every 2 months. Now, obviously, when COVID hit and the borders closed, we can't go to those markets anymore. So as a business and as a leadership team, we've had to learn to trust our local markets a lot more. You know, communication has had to improve because we need to speak to these markets on a kind of definitely a weekly or some cases a daily basis. So moving forwards, when we do get to the point that we start opening new locations again, we will definitely rethink our strategy of spending all of that money, sending out these people, you know, for months at a time and backwards and forwards in terms of, you know, do we actually really need to do that anymore? Or actually can we've now learned that we can trust our markets. We just give very clear guidelines on what our expectations are. And then our role is more of a guidance role than a role of this is what you're doing and we're going to monitor every step you take. And we've seen that with our Shanghai business. You know, the first time round, we sent everybody out there. Second time we opened in September, we couldn't go. So we had to rely very, very heavily on our local leader, who's done a fantastic job and actually been more successful than we were when we went out there.
That's a really, it's an interesting point you raised that I think not just your business, I know your business is food and beverage, but everybody had to gain trust throughout this. Every single business, it doesn't matter what you did, there had to be a learn of trust because people had to work remotely. I don't think we'd really seen that ever been explored in many businesses previously. So it's great to hear that in Shanghai, I don't know how you felt about it, but that they did even better than you guys did. Yeah. But the trust element is a huge portion of it, you know, with everybody working from home now. Bala, what about yourself from, you know, again, just that future aspect of, you know, what now? What's the workforce management going to look like? Because again, it's so interesting having the three of you with such a diverse, you know, perspective. But you know, to talk about that number of people that you would have coming over that border, what were the learns and takeaways where you really needed to kind of reflect for the future workforce?
It's a very interesting learning for us. You know, traditionally we've spoken about machine learning, where machines learn from human beings. I think this is the first time where we've learned from machines. So it's been the other way around for us. So if you think about how you typically plan data centers and capacities, there's always capacity that they distribute across multiple data centers. And they are able to take over the load in case of a failover. So we needed to think about people systems accordingly. And there are 2 key elements that we need to build. One is capability and the second is capacity. So how do we build capabilities? It's about upskilling people and having an ability that there are more than one people who have the same set of skills that can be called into use when required. So upskilling an organization to have duplication of skills is a key component. And then the second part is, how do you create capacity? Because everybody has a full day job at any given point in time. Now, if something was to fail, and here's a classic example, like in the 90s, offshoring was a huge, huge fad. Everybody was finding captive centers and they were offshoring a lot of work. Case in point, the pandemic hit and one city went into lockdown and our entire offshore capacity came down to zero because of one city that went under lockdown. So these kind of situations can occur. And how do we create capacity is by having a priority list, saying these are P0, these are P1, these are P2, P3. And once we are able to have that established across multiple sites, when something happens, we are able to quickly say that these are P0 tasks that everybody will focus on, and P2, P3 can get deprioritized. And that creates the capacity for the organization to pivot. So those are the two things that are very essential, creating that capacity and creating that capability through skills.
Yeah, I mean, there was always in some businesses, I feel, emergency plans, but they weren't necessarily for evacuation or, not mass work from homes. Or so it's great that was a takeaway from the business. Something that we're hearing a lot of as well at the moment is burnout. And I think it's a very hot topic and it's a very touchy topic sometimes. Some believe it, some don't. I certainly think it's there. What are everybody here, what are your thoughts on that? And how have you managed to, I don't want to say control, but assist in the best way possible? Because effectively now we're all living, eating, sleeping, working from our office home, Bala, I mean, as a first point, what do you think about that term? What are your thoughts on it? And, how have you managed to combat it? I can see a few grins. I think it's definitely a topic that everybody, has something to say about it. What are your thoughts?
I think it's definitely very, very relevant. Mental health has come up as top of the list in terms of concerns. Burnout, and I think there's something similar, slow burn. You don't realize you're burning out, but it kind of builds up over a time. And it's like the classic metaphor of a frog in a pan of water. So the water keeps heating up and the frog doesn't realize it and it gets cooked. Yeah. I'm guilty of organizing song and dance. Every HR person on the call would have organized some kind of a singing contest, some kind of a variety show. We all did that, right? So that was our first go-to to say, let's kind of give people something to connect and engage, because it was important to engage both ways, to push communications out, which we were doing a lot of, but we wanted to engage people back in. Yeah. So we did that initially, and then that gets to fatigue point as well. Like how many times do people, there's what we call depth by webinar. So the moment somebody saw webinar appear on their email box, they would just kind of log off. So we realized we needed to balance that. So don't overload people. Need to have a methodology where we are able to have two-way communication, not just push, but also receive feedback from people, provide a channel for them to communicate. We realized pulse surveys were incredibly helpful. So we partnered with this tool called Qualtrics. And they were amazing in terms of the kind of surveys they were able to launch for us. Very quick, very low time consumption, very easy to interface on the phone or very quick on the go kind of quick feedback, which gave us exactly what people were looking for. And that allowed us to create events or create engagement opportunities that were relevant for people at that point in time. Yeah. So, for example, as there's school holidays, then let's create something for the kids so that they don't go and trouble their parents while they're on the Zoom call, so they can keep them kind of occupied. So that kind of feedback mechanism helped us pivot our engagement initiatives.
I definitely hear what you're saying. I think we can all relate to seeing a link for another webinar or an invite for another webinar. But this one that we're all on now is fantastic, which is why everybody's joined it. Jan, from a Schaeffler perspective, the word burnout, how did that affect the business? What did you do to potentially combat, or, like Bala mentioned, what did you do within the business to manage that?
I definitely think, nowadays this topic will gain in relevance again. So what are we doing? I think similar to what Bala just mentioned. We do have certain activities. We have a wellness committee who's trying to engage our employees with different activities, different challenges. Last year we had, for example, like a step challenge. So you had to count your steps you're doing every day, and the weekly winner then got a small prize. Something like that. Or I don't know for Chinese New Year, for example, to post pictures of you and your family dressed up in Chinese New Year dresses. So different activities to getting them engaged. Surveys, of course. Also, one part we need to be aware there and to be careful not to overload our employees. With surveys. I think much more important is maybe also from a leadership perspective to check every now and then with your direct reports, with maybe peers, how they are doing, on a personal level. I mean, of course, it depends on your relationship, maybe also with the employee, but to check how are they doing at the moment. And I think probably the full extent of those maybe cases which might lead to burnout will be seen, I don't know, maybe just in a couple of months, because we are still going through waves, where something is going really well, people can go back to the offices, are able to socialize, and then out of the sudden you need to go back home for a couple of weeks. So it's like a roller coaster ride somehow. But so I think it will still take some time to see the full effect. But I think it's really important to have open and transparent communication with the employee, and also to take it serious when such concerns are being raised.
Yeah, I had a question, Natalie, for you, because we keep talking about what, from a business perspective with Bala and Jan, obviously their staff are essentially in front of a computer and have the IT platforms. I'm assuming food and beverage don't have computers, and, in some of the workforce even have accessibility to, the technology on a mobile device that would be able to have those interfaces. So what did you do to really keep that connect? And was burnout, was it because you had to downsize? Was burnout more or less? Give us a bit of feedback on that.
Yeah, so I think for our business, there's two phases to the burnout, or two different aspects. For our team members in the venues, it's physical burnout because, we reduced the team size by 40%. So, when we reopened, we were serving the same amount of covers with 40% of the team. Now, that was a big mindset change for them, but physically as well, it was exhausting. And unfortunately, we weren't in the financial position to go and recruit a lot more staff. So, I think the most important thing we've learned from this is to really listen to our teams. We came up with the great idea of let's shorten the shifts and introduce split shifts, which are quite common in F&B. So we implemented it, and the staff absolutely hated it because they were saying, well, I'm coming all the way in, then I'm going home for a few hours and I'm coming back again. So we then did a massive town hall and said, what can we do? And I think transparency is completely key in this area. We had to sit and explain to them, we're a very, very profitable business, and they just, they look at it and say, yes, we have COVID, but 40% reduction is a lot. So, we listened to the teams. They were saying, we don't want split shifts, but we want 2 meals a day versus 1 meal a day. So, there were things we could do for them in that sense. We also sent fruit hampers and kind of things into the venue to make sure they were constantly energized. And then, I actually shortened their overall shift. So we still gave them some time back. And then one thing we did is we just invested in some casual labor. So, for those days when they're really, really busy and they need some time off, we got the casual labor staff in to do the stuff that actually meant they could sleep in a bit longer during the day. They don't start at 10, they start at 12, for example. So where we could use casual labor, we've done that as well. And then for kind of the senior leaders in the team, the burnout really is mental. This is a very tough time for the business, for anyone in F&B. And it's constant firefighting. We're closed again, we're opening again, the government making an announcement, and then, it's not clear what's happening, and the questions are constant. So for the senior leadership team, it's really been about ensuring that we allow them to work from home. Actually, historically, my business was against working from home, so that's been a big mindset change. And also just to allow people to have a break. We don't expect responses to email right away. Take time with your families. If you need a day off, ignore policies for now. Just drop your line manager a message. I'm taking the day off. And just being really flexible in our approach to personal space from the business. I think that's really important.
I know we're coming close to getting to some Q&A or wrapping up, but one of the pieces that I'm hearing is obviously, I mean, I've taken a few key words, but I think a question I want to ask everybody is, there's been so much flexibility and change and agility and, re-scoping, re-org charting, doing all of that. But the flexibility from a business perspective, how do we think the business has taken this on and will continue to hear that flexibility into the future? Anyone can kind of take it away. Bala, do you want to kick off?
Sure.
Yeah.
You've seen some of these memes of people who are running, but they trip on something, but they continue to run, right? They get that momentum. So it's something like that that's happened. It was a hurdle. It was something that we stumbled, but we didn't lose our momentum. We kept running. We did have to do things differently. I don't think we've done all that we can, because it's a learning process. We're probably scratching the surface and getting to the beginning of what we need to do. Like Natalie spoke about, Jan spoke about, this has created a huge sense of urgency for being transparent, for being open with our communication. You spoke about it, that building trust is important, because we need to not just trust people, we also need to learn to let go a little bit, so that people can work independently, allow them the space and time, the flexibility that they can do it at their own time, but they deliver the results. So we're in that process of getting there. But the good thing is we didn't miss our momentum. We didn't fall. We stumbled, but we keep running.
Yeah. And Jan, from your perspective, I guess, how do you feel about, I guess, the business understanding and seeing this for the future as something that needs to be, I mean, I haven't seen from a mobility perspective, I have to say, nobody's put real change into policies as yet. I think people are still waiting to see what's going to happen in the future. But from your perspective, how do you think your business will tackle it for future state?
I think it really depends on the situation. Yeah, as I mentioned before, there are roles you just cannot replace, and they need to go abroad, to basically perform the tasks. But for others, and this is maybe also a learning we had, just because we have our physical headquarters in Singapore, this doesn't mean that all regional roles need to be located here.
Right.
So it's possible also to have the general counsel for the region based in Seoul, Korea. Why not? There are opportunities to connect every now and then, and hopefully in future there will be again opportunities to travel, at least a little bit more than we are used to do it now. So that's a learning we had. Before we maybe were thinking too much in such patterns. We have our headquarters in Singapore, so this role needs to be there. I think this has now loosened up a little bit, which is good. But nevertheless, it will be interesting to see how we as an organization will be continue to driving this once the pandemic is over.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're coming at the end of our time. It goes very quick, but I wanted to really just thank you all for coming on. I think, like I said, I can't emphasize enough, each one of you came with a completely different perspective, and I hope that people that are watching and listening, can take away a lot of learns, a lot of, different ways to manage the challenges that we're all working with right now. But, I guess, like I said, the key takeaways was really about training, the agility, learning to work virtually, irrelevant of what industry that we're in. upskilling, trust, you know, looking at those pulse surveys and reaching out to people and saying, hey, are you okay? And engaging with employees. I think I heard everyone say transparency, and I think that that was the best thing to remember, that transparency is super important. Thank you all so much for coming on to this. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And yeah, we really look forward to the next one next time round. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks, panelists, for sharing some great personal case stories from a wide range of different industries. That was a great panel. It's now time to break for lunch. We are going to be taking 30 minutes for lunch. Our next session starts at 1:20. Please feel free to come back and use this longer period to leverage the platform to network with other participants, and of course to visit our sponsors' booths. Reminder, some sponsors are offering prizes if you participate in their polls. Globalization Partners is giving away Watson's gift cards. Sirva is offering a free one-night stay in Fraser's service department. Ascender is giving away 5 $200 Grab food vouchers. And BPP is offering a $100 Amazon voucher. So grab your food, grab your lunch, and go and check out those booths. Look